Alongside his quest to find Ciri, Geralt can stumble upon and help many people within the Witcher 3 world with contracts. These contracts earn extra coin, open up interesting dialogues, and introduce the player to many different new and strong monsters. Today I'd like to talk about why those contracts are so freaking good. Hello guys, and welcome to yet another Witcher 3 video. Today we will be talking about contracts, which in my opinion are one of the best bits about this wonderful game. Geralt can find these contracts from notice boards or just by bumping into people and interacting with the world around him throughout the game. And each contract makes for an incredibly unique and interesting story within the world. So today I'd like to discuss the best and worst bits about these contracts in the game, and also show you some of my favourite contracts that I'm sure you will probably know about, but you may have overlooked in your playthroughs through the game, and may want to replay again after this video. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I'd like to start by talking about why I think contracts are so good and fit so well into this brilliant game. The first point really is that the contracts allow you to gain a really interesting insight into the wider Witcher world that is not necessarily given by main quests. Unless those monsters that appear in the contracts fit into the main quest line or are in the main quest line, you may not interact with any of that type of monster or learn anything about it or how to defeat it or fight it whatsoever. So this really is supplied by the contracts. It gives you a window into Geralt's life, his job, what he is intended to do when he's not obviously under the employ of Emperor Mir trying to find Ciri. Each of these contracts also sort of feels like a little short story almost from the books, and you never really know what to expect. Some of them are very simplistic and follow a very linear path. Others have twists and turns and chops and changes throughout, which keep you guessing as to what is actually coming next and what you may actually be facing. On top of this, they fit really well into a game like this, an RPG like this, because they are a reliable source of income and loot. So from that perspective, there is an incentive from the player to participate in these side quests because it ultimately helps them towards the main quest. It also happens to provide information on different monsters that again you may encounter at other points throughout the games. It may also get you to prepare bombs and oils and understand which signs are good against specific monsters by fighting them and using the bestiary to look them up. It comes with the added touch of adding named NPCs as the quest givers, as well as having named monsters. Gives them a very adds to how strong the monsters are throughout the game and makes each one very unique and feel like it's very impactful, the work that you're doing, because you're taking down an incredibly strong monster. Each monster being incredibly strong also means that it's actually a test for the player and is one of the ways to actually test your abilities and skill outside of the main quest. So in that way, contracts also provide a really interesting and unique challenge to the player. As I mentioned before, it also promotes the use of the bestiary to access the strengths and weaknesses of enemies ahead of time. Especially, this is especially important on higher difficulty levels. All in all, the contracts really continue the theme of the main game of allowing choice and interactions and actions with very significant consequences. Within the contracts, this is contained within the short story element. However, in the main story, obviously it has worldwide implications, as we discussed in the Reason of State video that came out last week. This, however, has slightly less of an impact, but it still allows you to impact specific elements of the game and impact somebody's life or a monster's life, which is not insignificant in the Witcher world. The contracts also give the player much more information about Geralt as a character and can help to get players, especially new players who may not have read the books, to understand Geralt's code, his thoughts, his feelings, his interactions with monsters, rather than visioning him as just a simple monster hunter. A monster hunter for hire, essentially. That even within the contracts, which is his job, of hunting monsters, there can be nuances. So for example, you can understand his thoughts about how dangerous different monsters are, and whether or not he will let them live based upon his own personal code and his thoughts and feelings on specific monsters, specifically sentient ones. Ultimately, I feel that this brings the player even closer to Geralt as you start to understand that his role on the continent, he is a Witcher. And it also shows how he is generally treated for that, as a mutant at times, but also respected by others. There are also these occupational hazards that he faces, not to mention all of the difficult decisions he has to make in just his day-to-day job. So that's why the contracts, I think, are really strong and really good part of this game. But in the interest of fairness, it's important to talk about potentially why the contracts are not so good. The first point really here is that from a pure story perspective, it's quite hard to see why Geralt wouldn't just drop everything to find Ciri. It's quite clear that she's very important to him, and anyone who's read the books will know that too. So the game doesn't necessarily make an effort to fit them into the story beyond you needing some kind of financial backing to get to Skellige. And obviously contracts would be one of the easiest ways to get the 1,000 gold required to get the boat to Skellige, for example. Other than that, the game doesn't make an effort necessarily to weave them into the story. They are presented separately and as optional side missions. For another point, this does, however, make sense. They are designed to be extra side content. They're not designed to be the main game. They are self-contained short stories. In fact, I often find myself on my playthroughs playing through the story and then coming back and playing the Witcher contracts after the fact, not during the main game, because they are little self-contained stories in their own right. The only other negative I can really think of is that some of the contracts themselves are quite simple, quite basic, and they don't necessarily have that much to them. But I think it's also important to have contracts like that in the game so that the contracts that do have twists and turns and are more interesting and nuanced stand out. You need the more linear ones to make the better ones stand out better. Because even the linear ones aren't necessarily bad, they are just very simplistic in their storytelling. Whereas, as I will discuss below, my favourite ones have quite a lot of complexity and nuance to them and their stories. With the positives and negatives of Witcher 3 contracts out of the way, I would like to talk about my personal favourite contracts and what happens within them. So, once again, spoilers ahead, because I will be talking about these specific contracts. I do recommend that you go and play them, ideally before you listen to this, but also this might inspire you to go back and play them if you've already done them but forgotten what happens, because these are some of the best ones in the game. They're my personal favourites. Leave a comment of your favourite Witcher 3 contracts in the comment section below. So let's start with an elusive thief. This is a particularly interesting one, and one that you can find quite early on in Novigrad when you first arrive there. It's kind of leveled around level 13, I believe. In this contract, you will talk to a merchant called Sylvester Omello, and he will give you some information about a kleptomaniac imp. Essentially, you then have to follow the imp's tracks, which look like giant cat feet, all the way around to the moat of Novigrad. And when they jump out of the water, they have human feet instead of imp feet that leads to a nearby house. When you go into the house, you can examine a note. In the note, it talks about it talks about a Doppler, and a Doppler taking the form of a beggar instead of taking the form of a giant cat, and encouraging the person who the note is for to burn the note, which they obviously didn't do. You then continue to search the house, which obviously belongs to a Doppler, and pick up a scent. And at the top you can pick up a scent from a collection of clothes that include clothes for different genders and different ages, implying that the owner, who only has one bed, can change their form. Following the scent, you run into a guard and an elf who, before you approach, are speaking in an unusually friendly tone. And as soon as you do approach, they start to begin to pretend that the guard was actually harassing the elf, and the elf leaves. After a quick dialogue conversation, you can chase after the Doppler, and once you catch up to him, after a short exchange of words, he will turn into a replica of you, leading to some very, very funny visuals. He'll then fight you as a replica of Geralt, complete with your abilities as well. Once you knock his health down to a quarter, he'll surrender and ask for mercy. And at that point, the big decision comes in. You can choose to let him go or to kill him. A third option will also present itself if you're at a specific point in the main quest. If you've completed the main quest Count Reuven's Treasure but not finished the subsequent main quest The Plays the Thing, a third dialogue option will present itself. Geralt will ask the Doppler to impersonate Caleb Menger and sail to Temple Isle to trigger Dandelion's release. However, this horrifies the Doppler, and he pleads instead to be killed than be subjected to the torture. Geralt relents and lets him go in this option. This option also yields no additional rewards, as the Doppler runs off without giving a bonus of crowns or a weapon, which you do get if you let him go normally. And the merchant still only pays half the reward. So essentially you must decide whether this Doppler lives or dies. And obviously, as I just mentioned, your rewards will differ depending on the result. If you decide to not kill him, then the merchant will only pay out half, as you don't have a trophy, but the Doppler does give you some gold and a weapons diagram. You can also return his head for a full reward. And that concludes the quest either way. I like this contract in particular because you can encounter it quite early in Novigrad, and thus gain more information and world building about Dopplers themselves, and really what they are, especially if you're a new player to the game, and you haven't managed to get Dudu to appear yet. If you've not met Dudu, then you might not know any information at all about Dopplers, and so it fits quite well into the story there. It also begins to give an insight into Geralt's code when it comes to sentient monsters, as well as having that option to interact cleverly in that way with the main quest line. The second contract I wanted to talk about is actually Deadly Delights. Within this, you get given a quest by a guard to look into a monster attack on some guardsmen. You can then speak to a medic who will explain the kinds of injuries that they had, and eventually lead you to tracks that lead to Crippled Kate's brothel on the port side. There are then multiple options depending on what you do in the next conversation, once you talk to the Madame of Crippled Kate's. If you use Axie in the conversation, she will reveal that there is a succubus placed in a house nearby who is likely to have killed the guards, and has been used by the brothel to encourage more customers to come in. If you don't use Axie, she will refuse to tell you anything about it, and you will have to find a bottle of perfume to follow the scent round to exactly the same house, and converse with a man outside there who will reveal where the succubus is holed up. If you get the key, you can walk straight through the front door, but if you find and follow the scent instead, you have to walk through an adjacent building and drop in through the ceiling and confront Salma, who is the succubus. So regardless of how you got in, you can either choose to immediately attack the succubus or hear her out. If you listen to her, she'll give you a basic explanation that essentially she was caught by surprise and attacked by the guards, so she acted in self-defense and defended herself. You can then choose whether to kill her or tell her to leave the city. If she has to leave the city, she will give you a trophy so that you can go and get the reward from the guard to show as proof, even though she's not very happy about it. Then you must go to the guard, show the proof, and the quest completes, regardless of whether you killed her or not. Either you show what Salma gave you, or you bring her head as a trophy to the guard. Again, this contract is particularly interesting because it utilizes multiple Witcher senses, so it's using the mechanics of the game. Again, it's encountered quite early on into Novigrad, and so is encouraging the use of these senses to find and investigate clues. It also once again illustrates Geralt's code when it comes to sentient creatures. The ability to let Salma off is quite key, I think, to how Geralt would normally act. But obviously as the player you get to make the final decision on what he does. I think the other advantage is also that it leans on Axii as well, and Axii gives you a way out of an elaborate way to complete the quest, as many quests and interactions in The Witcher 3 do. The final quest I want to talk about is absolutely my favourite one of the lot. This is absolutely my favourite quest. It's called, and it's in Skellige again, it's called Skellige's Most Wanted. This one is absolutely brilliant, and I would recommend you go and replay it after this video if you or play it for the first time if you've never played it before. I think this contract is deliberately designed to be the last one you're supposed to do. It's the highest level contract, I think, in the base game, and I think that's intended to be completed after most, if not all, of the other quests and contracts. This contract can also have reference to some of the other of my favourite contracts that I've just listed for you. It starts by finding the contract giver in a Skellige town. He will, once you start talking to him, he will dismiss other Skellige warriors' help, which is already a bit odd. And once entering into conversation with him, you can discuss a few things before actually asking what he needs help with. And during this conversation, he appears to get a lot of geography facts wrong and not recognise clan colours or even say the clan names properly. Eventually, once you talk about the contract, he'll tell you he got attacked by a large group of Neckers and needs you to clear the way so that he can make his way back down the road. If you haggle on the contract, he will readily agree to give you the highest amount of reward without a single question about it. No annoyance level, no nothing, which already is a little bit odd. With that sorted, you can head to the spot and find a destroyed wagon. You examine the horse and corpse there, but things aren't adding up about the supposed attack. After examining both, a short cutscene plays where Geralt narrowly avoids being crushed by a boulder, and so obviously something weird is going on, so it's time to investigate further. Eventually you will find where the boulder was pushed from and see Necker tracks walking away from it. Following the Necker tracks leads you into a cave which eventually gets shut off behind you. Inside the cave there are Endrega and Endrega workers and an Arrakis ready to fight you. After dispatching them, you can follow the rest of the Necker boot tracks all the way up to a bit where one appears to be lost. You'll find a hollowed out Necker boot. You examine this spot for more dialogue, and Geralt notes that it appears to be a human child's footprint that is on the other boot not held by the Necker boot. Eventually you find your way to a final room where there are childlike drawings of not so childlike innocence. There are drawings of plans essentially to target Geralt and kill him, first by trying to crush him with the boulder, and then with the Arrakis and the Endrega nest, neither of which of course worked. The last drawing indicates the final meeting place for the conspirators and the pranksters. Heading out the door, you will be in a Necker nest, which you will have to clear before making your way over to the final meeting place and meeting there at midnight. Once you enter the arena that was drawn so beautifully, a cutscene will play, and three beings will approach: a godling, an ice troll, and a doppler. Eventually, a fourth, a werewolf, will appear, wondering why the Witcher isn't dead yet. And it quickly becomes clear that the first three only wanted to scare Geralt as a monster hunter, and the werewolf wants Geralt to be dead, and wants you and all other witches to pay for what happened to its partner, Adalia. As Geralt, you then have three choices: try to show that you've helped monsters before, fight them, or try to part ways. If you choose any but the first, you'll be forced to fight all of the enemies apart from the godling, who runs away. If instead you choose to show that you've helped monsters in the past, you'll need to use two examples from the below. One of those examples is sparing the trolls at Kaer Morhen, letting Sarah stay in Novigrad, sparing Salma in Deadly Delights, which we discussed above, sparing Whamawam, in missing miners, as established above, sparing the imp in an elusive thief, which we mentioned above as well, sparing the all-god in the quest A Greedy God, lifting Morkvarg's curse and sparing him in Wolf's Clothing, and helping Johnny to recover his voice in Ladies of the Wood. Using 2 examples will cause all but the werewolf to back down, but blinded by hatred, the werewolf will still force you to fight and kill him. After he's dead, the godling will then approach, remarking how the werewolf used to be different until he lost his partner. She'll then thank you and give you the Necker hide boots as a reward, which are some outstanding drip, let me tell you. So this contract is by far my favourite because when playing through for the first time, the turn of events is genuinely bizarre and not expected at all. It also presents a genuine significant challenge to find out what is going on, and then essentially acts as a test to see whether Geralt is in fact both a protector as well as a killer of monsters, and allows him to prove this with effect, providing, of course, that you as the player have actually acted in that way yourselves. It also shows Geralt in the cutscene to give a speech which I think sums up his views towards monsters perfectly and is perfectly captured by this line of dialogue.
I kill monsters, true. It's my job. But only when they threaten humans.
You hate us! Hate us all!
Humans hate you all. Because they don't know you. Don't know which of you are dangerous and which want to live in peace. Only Witchers stand between you and humans. We know both worlds. Protect both. We kill dangerous monsters, so the thinking ones can live in peace.
Of course, this line of dialogue only rings true providing the player did in fact respect monsters and spare some throughout the game. To summarise and conclude then, in my opinion, contracts are just an awesome side element in this beautiful game. It does brilliant things and assists the main story amazingly by helping to build Geralt's character as one, helping to build an understanding of the world and the monsters within it, but also linking it nicely at times to the main quest as we've seen with the examples I gave. I think that element, alongside the extra loot and crowns required, that will help the player in the main quest line mean that although you can ignore them, it's better to do them and participate in them. And once you do, you're not leaving wanting. You are satisfied with each individual short story. Of course, some are better than others and some have elements that aren't so great. But in general, each one individually as a little short story on the side with a little bit of a reward and some loot to help you along in the main quest is really just a strength of the game. Another arrow in the quiver, so to speak. I think these contracts also present a challenge, particularly on the higher difficulties too, and that influence is not to be understated. At times, the main questline can feel very linear, especially when you're in Novigrad and there's not always a lot of action going on. So a contract on the side, which provides a bit of a challenge, is a welcome one, and a welcome one for the player who will be rewarded with incredible loot and often gold afterwards. My final point really is, this game is incredibly clever, and it is very clever of this game to use additional content like this to effectively tell these short stories. These short stories do not have an impact on the story, but provide a context for the story, a context of the world for Geralt's desire to find Ciri. Ultimately, these quests are engaging in beautiful world building and character building, because these quests focus specifically on Geralt and his job. And that is really impactful for the main quest. That's all I have to say on contracts. If you have any opinions on any of the contracts I talked about, or any opinions on contracts at all, or just things you'd like to see from The Witcher 3, I'm making a lot of Witcher 3 content at the moment. If you have any ideas or things you'd like me to talk about, let me know in the comment section below. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Please check out my last video, which is on the Witcher 3 quest that Geralt himself wouldn't do. Should be on screen now for you. And otherwise, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks again for watching, and peace.
Exactly. Why do you wham 'em?
Things in walk troll house. Trolls say outmans, but they wham-a-wham troll rocks. So troll wham too.